Let's get our little opening show on the board. Our clickety clacks. Welcome to Evolution Hour. On the next to the last time for Christmas. Whoops, come on. There we go. Troubles in Paradise, methodology, creationism. Stop sharing. Okay. There we go. Now we'll find out whether or not we got folks in the live chat or not. I will type a message in there. Hi, all. And as usual, because of the fact that we can never tell what's going to be going on with live stream and how long it goes, I'll get a lot of the business end out of the way. Let me readjust here. We've got shameless plugs, Rocks with Air, Evolution Slam Dunk, Paralogs of Hog. Hello, Vesta! Means the live window is open. And then for just of those of us who really like that sort of a thing, we've got the, whoops, there we go, Fierce Santa Claus up on the holiday thing. I decided not to go for a tie this time because this one at least has an upper button intact, and so it doesn't expose all the stuff down beneath. So right off the bat, let me get out of the way with thanking the patrons for the project who have stuck out in thick and thin through actually giving money to keep this old part going on the program. Our colleagues Hendro, Colton, Eric Raleigh, Suris, and Zeshi. Our researcher level, Travis Adams, Ian Chem, Kaburki, Stephen Early, Pete Neal, James Fitzwater, History Minor, Ralph McFadden, Pelagia, Benjamin Simpson, Speed of Sound. Hello, Beach. And sister researchers, Duranku, Totus Real, Christopher Johnson, our friend level Daniel, Steve Bauman, Marigale Meadows, Insects Are Cool, Devin Reeves, Morton Nielsen, Paul the Skeptic, Puffalophagus, Bo Rasmussen, Alex Stone, and Paul Williams. And I will continue to thank the legacy patrons, Jen, Jody, Mike, John, Keith, Andrew, Dyer, Yui, Mona, Brad, Daniel, Nana, Staggles, Sunsky Stone, Ugly Joe Montrose, Everett, and Sewer, who were able to help at various times, but circumstances changed and all that, but you were able to help. So, as all of you know, also, I'll put the opening summary of what the hell's going on quickly, just in case there's the old live stream feed problem. Primary subject is week by week, we go through Replacing Darwin, The New Origin of Species, which is not an especially thick book. That has no index and no reference bibliography. And like I did with Rupin Sanford earlier, I'm going through source by source to find out what's in it and are they overlooking information? Spoiler. And giving some indication of why their arguments aren't actually getting very far. Then part two of the show is always about one of the kind of upcoming things that I bump into over time. And the one that pops up for this week is a weird posting from Evolution News from a little bit back, a couple months ago. Does gold have a purpose? Science hints at answers. And it's a weird gee whiz kind of thing, but actually it turned out there were quite a few of the papers they were alluding to were available open access. So I thought, yeah, let's kind of share and give a part of the thing why that kind of gee whiz approach is so unproductive in the sciences and rather dreary. But anyway, so Beach, Investa, anybody else in the live stream, say hi. So I can find out who all is here. We've only got a couple weeks left to go through the rest of the year. It's tumultuous. Who knows what the hell's going on, but everybody's kind of hunkered down, hopefully staying safe, wearing masks if they have to go out, trying to avoid bumping into the numbskulls who keep on holding Christmas parties and breathing on each other and behaving in ways that are not helping matters at all. Don't do that. Don't do that. So otherwise, I would be over on the coast with my niece's family because we've been getting together there. I wasn't able to help put up the Christmas tree or the little baby Jesus and the little crash and all that kind of stuff. But that's what you do to get through the little COVID times. Anyway, the Jensen thing, chapter 4, which is where I'm at the moment, is all about the exciting world of biogeography, which for anybody that knows anything about evolution knows biogeography is a really big thing. This is something that got Darwin going and Alfred Wallace back in the 19th century, and that is, where do things live today And is there a reason why they're there? And this is particularly so if you're like on islands, where the farther you are away from something, the more restricted the things are, even if they're kind of big. Earlier weeks alluded to Hawaii. Hawaii is quite a good-sized piece of real estate there, with a large islands that can have pigs and others, but none of those are native. They've all been brought there by human beings. And that's because to get to an isolated island, you got to be able to fly or float, things that can float over the ocean as seeds or in vegetation mats, little small critters that can stay on board those things, all that kind of thing. And so there is a very precise biogeography to those, but even for larger pieces of real estate, it's a relationship that's happening. And the example that he brought up that I'm looking into has to do with the British Isles. The whole chapter is devoid of technical citation. All it was had links in the reference notes to Encyclopedia Britannica or state websites telling how many animals live there or what's the acreage. I mean, it's all very generic material. And for 2017, it's just way beyond. But he mentions with the British Isles, he marvels how the islands, quote, harbored deer, foxes, weasels, rabbits, and rodents, unquote. Well, Britain, although it's an island now, during the Ice Age, when the sea levels dropped, it wasn't an island. It was connected to the mainland. So could it be that some of the distribution of critters that are found today in the islands have a connection to what's known on the mainland? And if you look backwards in time through the Ice Age, does that make sense? Did it occur to Jensen to think about any of that? Not in any of the sources that are being presented. But I found a paper from 2011 by Drucker, which goes into the red deer example and shows it had a very wide distribution in Europe and connects up with the ones that were living in the mainland. Surprise, surprise. So I'll be putting the link all to that. But that can apply to absolutely everywhere. But if biogeography makes as much sense on a continental scale as it does for isolated islands. So when you have a large landmass, you have populations that can expand or contract, but now they're being governed by climate, by the way the rivers are going, whether they are fish that migrate upstream and the animals that eat them and all that stuff. So there's layers on layers of ecological context that occur even in continental landmasses. And all of that would need to be explained in a creationist context too, which try finding examples of that. Worse, we can work out what paleo environments there were. Theoretically, the flood model has a paleo environment. There was the original created world. And what did it look? Oh, Slade, come here. Hi, sorry I'm late, but you're clashing with Gutsick Gilbert being only. Oh, yes, yes. This has been a busy week all the way around for debates, and I have no problem. Typically, a lot of the debates I like to come in on after they're done, because I can then look in and freeze frame and follow up on the source data. Unless they're once in a while, I'll want to be in the live chat during the debate so I can be probing whilst the debaters are doing their little shtick. But this has been a busy week of debates all the way around, and commentary pieces and as well. Dan Stern Cardinale and Just a Walking Fish did a wonderful post just a couple of days ago on Robert Carter's latest twaddle, with claiming that there's a patriarchal genetic evidence for long patriarchal lives in the Noah times and all of that. And it's based on a pile up of false assumptions and misrepresentations of data and avoidance of things. And in an upcoming week, I'll put some information in on that. And of course, it's also going to get alluded to in Rocks Volume 2, because it's just a juicy little issue of where the creationists just keep on spilling out all the same thing. But yeah, don't mind that. If there's a debate going on with Erica, sweet, wonderful Erica, I think she's in a tag team with Cy Garda and going after John Maddox and somebody else, modern day debate, and that should be peculiar, one way or the other. But at any rate, if anybody wants to jump out and go over to that rather than watch me that's what the advantage of YouTube is. Don't feel disturbed by it because everybody, oh, hello, Titan. Everybody can catch either live or after the fact. And I've noticed in my own shows, you know, the amount of views and stuff goes up afterwards. People can catch them in the wee hours of the morning or whenever they jolly well feel like. And because I keep the comments section open at all times, anybody can come in at any time and make comments on them, unless they're stupid folk who make idiotic remarks and try to use it for their own apologetic ends, in which case I'll warn them about it and say, nah, no more. And I can delete them. But that's a very rare thing. I don't have a typical problem with most people doing all that stuff. Anyway, so the biogeography thing is something that everybody can and should theoretically apply to wherever you are in a particular thing. I live in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, so there's a range and repertoire of critters here and plants, and even down to where you're talking about the diatoms live in particular environments and all of that. Everything has a biogeographical context. And if creationists really wanted to be serious about this issue, they should be really working out carefully what the pre-flood world was looking like, and then section by section, layer by layer, telling us what happened in the flood based on the evidence that supposedly is so fabulously good. And then when did the world we know now settle into place? How long did that take? What exactly happened in the course of that? And then in that ecological context of all of this, have how do the animals interact? How do they get to be where they do? And Slade says, don't have a COVID here. I'll be swimming in my brother's house for Xmas. Oh, you must be in one of those little spots that have behaved reasonably and carefully. Yeah, that's Spokane's had a little bit of improvement on things. We live next door to Idaho, which has been kind of open borders, and the restaurants were all open, and everyone was running around without masks. And so there's a leakage, literally, across the border on here, which is different from what's going on over on the east, the west side of the state, the west side. When you have very large states like California with a huge diverse population, and there were people just running amok no matter what the governor was telling them up in Sacramento, or even the mayor in Los Angeles, there's still people doing their shtick. Well, now they're shit creek in terms of running out of bed space and all of that. So these things can escalate very rapidly, and that's why most of the medical people are going, because things can get completely out of control. And although there's the new vaccine coming along, it takes time for that to get into place. And of course, we all know until January 20th, President Nincompoop is in charge, and they've managed to screw things up right and left. And the post office is apparently late on delivering packages and that. Surprise, surprise, Mr. DeJoy is not bringing the joy to people. La-di-da, the way we go. So anyway, Vesta says Alberta is on a second lockdown from December 13th to January 12th. Alberta, that's just north of us. Edmonton gets our PBS channel, so I'm sure you get reportage on that. We're kind of in an odd spot here in Spokane. It's kind of a regional hub, even though Edmonton and Calgary and these other cities are much bigger than we are. They're the kind of blobs of high population density in a very large region, much bigger than the state of Washington. And yeah, Spokane has a regional network there. So our PBS channel runs for here and Coeur d'Alene and Calgary and Edmonton, all the way down the line. So there's a cross-border thing that goes on with us, which I find rather delightful. That's got a cross connection on stuff. And oh, and by the way, here's a plug for PBS. If any of your local PBS channels are showing the Christmas Lights from London show from 2018, our local PBS did it. Catch it. It's really neat. It's got a high definition walkthrough of Kew Gardens and all the lights and stuff in there. And it's just absolutely a delightful program. It's about an hour long. And if it's available anywhere, or if you can find it on streaming, take a look at it. It's very, 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 very low key. They're basically this guy following around with a camera. And so they're on double-decker buses and traipsing around in various spots. The ice skating rink outside of the Museum of Natural History and that, which I didn't know they had an ice skating rink. You know. And it's also a weird time travel thing because here you are from 2018 going, crowds of people wandering around interactively. Weird. That's absolutely strange. Yeah, check that one out. It was an absolutely delightful show because it's in high definition. You see a level of focus and detail. And I also have a delight for creating an amusement park in my head, my Nat Park design that I've got. There's another one that you can find online. In fact, I'll type that into the live chat. I think it's called Remember When, and it's on Natatorium Park. Natatorium Park. And I believe it's on YouTube that you can find for freebie. And it's about an hour or so show about the amusement park that used to be here in Spokane. And it shut down pretty much in the 1960s. I visited it occasionally just before it fell apart back then when we would be visiting up here from Southern California. And I'm at about minute 50 something in there because you can see the design that I did. And so this was a show from 1995 or 6, somewhere around in there. So it's been a long time, 25 years ago. But anyway, you can see the park that I was designing for Nat Park, and there's one little shot where there's like a pull away, so they look at Bad Ludwig's castle, and the camera just pulls and pulls and pulls, the design getting bigger and bigger and bigger and all that. That's the thing that I have stuck down in my basement. And theoretically, anybody out there is like got billions of dollars to burn, and after COVID wants to build the world's greatest amusement park, I'm ready to go. And we'd actually have to configure it to handle potential COVID circumstances. You know, I mean, no one's ever designed an amusement park to take advantage of what do you do if you have to do social distancing. We're already kind of in that scale with the fact that smartphones have come along, and so people. We're supposedly back on the screen. Let me stick my little commercial up in here. So we'll go ahead and play The Rocks Were There. This is the thing that Peter generated for The Rocks Were There Volume 1. Probably too late to get your copy for Christmas because it's December 23rd. But hey, there's New Year's and Valentine's Day and Albanian Labor Day and who knows what other wonderful holidays there are that you could use this. So we'll let this stream through, and that way we'll have that all organized. Rocks Were There, Straight Science Answers to Bent Creationist Questions. We're very proud of the book. Jackson, by the way, is working today. So otherwise, he would be able to join us for the discussion. So he's doing the job thing. And There we go. We're almost down to there. Packed with facts and references. It is a thick book. There we go. And then you can buy that theoretically at Amazon. You can order it probably through a regular book club too. There's nothing in principle on that as well. Anyway, so yep, I'm back. I am back. Okay, there we go. Yeah, there's quibbles up and down. It wouldn't surprise me given the fact that in the holidays times people are doing Zooms and YouTubes up the yin yang, and so the bandwidth issues. Yeah, up we go. So anyway, I gave the basic layouts on anybody, if there is anybody in the live chat there, respond to the I am back to make sure that there's actually people still observing the thing. Otherwise, we may want to curtail the show on there. So anyway, when the show is actually officially posted, then I'll put in the links to the Evolution News posting. Oh, hello. Yes, good. There we're great. Um, I'm still unclear about all the bits when the stream gets interruptions. So if it's a matter of where it automatically comes back online and nobody's lost from it, then that's fine. Slade said, "Wish I had the money for an amusement park." Yeah, so do I. It's a really funky thing. Check that fun out because it's an interesting little old amusement park that used to exist in Spokane. There are still a handful of family-owned parks. Kennywood in Pennsylvania is one of the ones, and that actually was the park that started the craze for single-price admission, which in the 80s and 90s gradually infected all the other amusement parks to the point where now you don't buy tickets to go on individual attractions. You buy a generic admission ticket and then ride whatever you want whenever you want. Well, all that's due to the Kennywood Amusement Park. Thank you very much. So there's a little bit of the history of the amusement park format on there. Anyway, the Nat Park design that I came up with, which was short for Natatorium Park, which was a swimming pool thing, but I thought Nat Park, National Park, it had a nice connotation to it. Just think 10 Disneylands all together in one super park, couple square miles. It's a big operation. And the technology had advanced things that I was just envisaging, linear induction rides and simulation adventures using 3D things and all that, that were just hypothetical back in the 1980s when I first had the idea for it, are now practical considerations. So theoretically, that could be a much more feasible operation to do. And all we need is like $4 or $5 billion, So anybody that finds out about it, let them know about it. Anyway, I'll fill in then on the rest of the second part of the show about this idiotic evolution news thing about gold. And it's still a legitimate science issue as to why there's so much gold in the universe. And evolution news is going, ooh, this is a mystery because the neutron stars can't collide fast enough to make enough gold and all that. Well, in the natural world, it reminds me of the neutrino problem that creationists were bitching about in years past, that supposedly the sun wasn't generating enough neutrinos for the Earth, and yet we couldn't seem to detect them. Supposedly, all these neutrinos were coming out of the sun, and we couldn't seem to. Well, they were hard to detect. And secondly, processes in the sun would spin them around and turn them into different things and all that kind of stuff. So the normal science attitude is, if you don't know why something is the case, what it is, based on your current model, well, then probably you're leaving something out. That's why, not magic. It's not because Zeus decided to make neutrinos or take the neutrinos from the sun. It was because we didn't understand the process well enough. So in the case of gold and the production of them in heavy sequences, because they're not, a lot of the heavy elements aren't produced in a main sequence star until it goes nova. Some elements apparently are fused together during the supernova process, but some apparently require even more energy, and that's where exploding neutron stars and a whole bunch of other funky little things come in. Well, remember, we're out in the low rent district. We're in a spiral arm where stars are relatively far apart. Our nearest neighbor is 4.5 light years away. That if you want to think how undense a spiral arm is in terms, imagine that you are in the middle of a football field with a sun size, a marble about half-inch across to represent your sun. 4.5 light years is another marble about 200 or 300 miles away. That's how far apart stars are out here in the low rent neighborhood. Well, it's way denser in the high rent district in galactic cores. And I suspect that the reason why gold and other elements get distributed the way they do is that there's a lot more going on in the high rent district orbiting black holes in the center of galaxies. And as they're sucking in material, stuff is getting thrown off from obliterated star systems that gets thrown out into the low rent district that eventually coalesces to form the stuff that we then make as gold rings at overpriced jewelry stores. That's what I suspect the solution of it will be. Anyway, this evolution news stuff double dipped a reference to an astrophysical journal paper that has not yet been published. Ovesta says, on Orthodox Christmas, we are planning on cooking Ukrainian food and delivering it to friends, which is better than cooking Ukrainian friends and delivering it to food. That's an entirely different thing. And I'm glad you're doing the other way around. Ukraine, which is having its own problems interacting with its former Soviet Union buddies up there in Russia. Kiev, which of course that the Chernobyl thing in Ukraine. It's a country that hopefully will settle down. I've heard that Putin might have Alzheimer's, or not Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease. So he may be retiring in the next few years. And I go, good riddance. And then we can kind of settle in and change stuff around and get back more into that progress thing. So we'll see how it is. I'm still expecting and demanding a prosperous, future-oriented, science-y 21st century. Not one where people are running around making stupid wars and blowing each other up with landmines and avoiding behaving reasonably when there's communicable diseases and doing all sorts of stupid shit. I mean, we need that better 21st century than we were doing before. Hello, Lisa. We were off the air briefly for a few minutes, but the thing reactivated, and so I'm still into dithering mode. Anyway, I'll be putting the links in once the show finalizes for that paper on the British deer that you can look into, and also the evolution news thing, and then the various technical literature that they're referring to, because the evolution news finally just went over the hill on that, because they went on about gold deposits are able to reach the surface because they're helped along by sulfur ions. Is it intelligently designed to do that? It actually kind of dangled these notions, and apparently little tiny gold ions can be used in some medicinal circumstances, and the immune system and the biology can interact with all of that. And that's basically more gee whiz stuff. These are open access articles, so I'll be putting them in there. Dave says, it always amuses me whenever shows movies, for whatever reason, I have to throw things into the sun and do so in a few minutes or less. Oh, yeah, there was, people have a problem with stellar distances and spatial maneuverings in general. There was that series that was kind of a knockoff of When Worlds Collide, where was on for a season or so, and I think it may have been canceled. But anyway, this sort of Elon Musk style guy was building a space ark, and one of the episodes had a probe out in Saturn that was doing something to try to interfere with this asteroid that was coming to Earth, and it was doing stuff, and they were watching it real time. They were sending the signal to Saturn and getting information back from the probe at Saturn instantly, live. I'm sorry, that speed of light thing, it's taken minutes to get information, but you don't have live interaction that way. Just like you got a 1.5-second delay to communicate with somebody on the moon, and you've got hours the farther out you go, and so forth and so on. People have a long problem with this, and I'm an old enough fart. Even when I was a little teeny child fart, I had problems with scientific errors. I was only like 13 years old when Lost in Space came on. in 1965, and I could tell that they were having problems with dealing with like how far it was to Alpha Centauri, and that there's nothing in between to stop at. So, what planet do you think you're landing on, and how come you're suddenly being catapulted to where? And how come whatever this planet that they land on seems to be like Grand Central Station, where every alien in the universe is dropping in, but nobody gives them a lift home? No, these were things that have always bothered me about that kind of stuff. I think we've got slightly more sophisticated science fiction writers on a lot of shows, but still, people really do probably have a problem wrapping their head around the size of deep space and the depth of deep time, and trying to integrate all of that in their head. I've never had particularly a big problem doing that. I mean, I just kind of get a scale in my head as to how big things are, and then you just live with it. You know, that's what you do. It's just part of your neighborhood, and to realize how difficult it is to get to other star systems because they're so far away that you would have to be able, you have to somehow get closer to the speed of light, in which case now you have another problem. You're plowing along at near optical velocities. My gosh, you got to find ways to keep from slamming into. There's like one hydrogen atom for every cubic meter of space in interstellar space. That's not a problem unless you're slamming into it at 80% of the speed of light, in which case it can be bumpy. So you better have really good rubber bumpers, magnetic bumpers around the thing. Lisa said, I like The Martian. I think that was the title of this. That was a very good film. I happen to have gotten a copy of it. It's also got like the extended edition of it. And even though they did one or two things where technically the people that made the show knew it was kind of a technical error, it was not a serious issue, but almost everything else they really tried to be appropriate on it. And I also particularly liked the fact that there was no conventional villain. That it was the astronauts and the scientists working against nature and the challenges of the physical environment that was implacable and unforgiving and was going to kill you if you didn't look out. But there was no evil plot by a cabal of people trying to do snotty things. I mean, everybody basically was working as best they could, but nature is tough. And so I really enjoyed that. And of course, it was based on a book by somebody who really did their homework and thought it through carefully. And it was intelligently done. It was well written. It was cast. It was effectively directed and written. It had a very good mood all the way around. So yeah, I can heartily recommend it. In fact, it's one that you can watch with the audio commentary on, the description of the people doing that. If you've got the DVD or Blu-ray, that gives you some extra oomph. And I'm one of those that always likes to know. Oh, David said, was that the one with blonde beard? I'm not sure. I have no idea what that one is referring to. Theoretically, I could geek out on science fiction films all night on that. Hear that? Anybody that wants to have a live chat thing where we can go on and on, because I'm very much a science fiction lover, but because I'm an old fart, I'm aware of a lot of very, very older science fiction movies that not only ones from when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s and 70s. So I was already an adult by the time Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind and that came out. And that there is a science fiction film tradition before the science fiction films of the 1950s, that you had little flirtations with Jules Verne going all the way back into 1916, one of the first film versions of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. By the way, it's not a very good film version. Go with the Disney one from 1954, folks. E.T. the Extraterrestrial, yeah, that was early 80s. It still holds up extremely well as a film. It was originally called like A Boy and His Dog. It was very much Steven Spielberg in terms of the personal relationship issues, and the main protagonists are all adolescents and kids, and so you have a different context of it. It's very much a wonderful feel good kids movie, and you know, if you're not all crying over poor little E.T. At the end of the movie, then you really are slogging. And if you can see it either in the original version, and then they did a kind of a special edition where they kind of gussied up some of the special effects and all of that. I think there's been rumors about maybe kind of doing a sequel, but boy, it's a tough act to follow. It's very specialized in terms of the emotional context. I will recommend to everybody Things to Come, which is the H.G. Wells science fiction from 1936, which is available in probably the best version you can get. That's the Blu-ray one, and not the colorized one that Ray Harryhausen stuck out. That's even been able to find, I think, a minute or two of missing film footage of the film because it was cut down radically after it premiered. And it's an unnervingly interesting science fiction film that Arthur C. Clarke was blown away by when he saw it in theaters in 1936. That's an apocalyptic, bleak future of civilization collapsing and then rebuilding in the 21st century. And Jupiter Rising, that was a funky little epic thing. I'm of mixed minds about some of those. I think it was either based on a novel or a graphic novel that there have been a couple splashy. They're very special effects films. That's the one thing that I'm kind of frustrated about from the prevalence of CGI, is it can make film directors go overboard on what they can do with films. And so you want things with giant battles and zillions of space aliens flitting around and fast camera angles, and the cameras can move all over the place because you can do that now far better than trying to do things with optical shots. You want to see how much things have changed. Watch The Empire Strikes Back, not the cleaned up version that with all the visual effects that got tidied up by George Lucas. But if you can get your handle on the original editions of the films, I think my old Laserdisc had that, and you watch the flight through the asteroid belt, and you're seeing these blocks of boxes around the objects because that's how they had to do stuff, and they didn't really have the ability to clean up those optical shots very easily. This was all in the 1980s, and all of that changed radically since then. And by the time you get down to the Jurassic Park era in the 1990s, they're really starting to make use of digital compositing, and they can now stop doing conventional matte shot photography from the old 2001 era. Is this boring, everybody, in terms of the history of visual effects? But it's kind of a nice holiday digression on things. I mean, you can get only so far trying to burrow your brain in with evolution news or diving into British deer ecology in the technical literature. But it's a funky little thing to do on science fiction films in that period. Another one that's my super duper favorite. It's a little later than Things to Come. Quatermass and the Pit, 1967 or 8. Oh, Flight of the Navigator, Lisa. Oh, yes. It's another wonderful. It's sort of a kind of a kids movie kind of a thing, but it's a delight. Flight of the Navigator. It's an old Disney film that it's a very charming film, and it's way deeper and more poignant than it had any right to be as just a little light movie. Yeah, Flight of the Navigator is very, very clever. In fact, I do a little homage to Flight of the Navigator in my Paralogs of Fog novels. Shameless plug. Whoops, in a minute. There we go. Right up there. Paralogs of Phileas Fogg, Volume 1. Which is based on Around the World in 80 Days, the second story, which I'm nearing completion on. We get to go to Monsieur Passepartout's spaceship that he has currently parked inside of a silver mine in Alsace, which when he landed on Earth was in France, but now it's in Germany. And so the times have changed by 1873. And it's a shape-shifting, camouflaging spaceship that's quite small because in his original form, he's quite small. And it's a bit of a homage to that fascinating teardrop silvery spaceship in Flight of the Navigator. Um, yeah, the Flight of the Navigator was one of the very few films you got to watch as a kid. Yeah, well, it's a sweet movie. It's a wonderful kids film. I think it got a G rating at most. I don't think there's any foul language in it, and it's a very touching film. It's in that period in the 1980s at the tail end of the optical filming approach before digital started taking over. And yeah, I can thoroughly recommend it. And another one, even though the special effects now are kind of clunky because we've changed so much. Doctor Who episodes have more sophisticated special effects, but the Last Starfighter, I think, is another charming film. I'll put that in there. That's from around the same time as Flight of the Navigator, I think. And it's another charming little science fiction film. Um, Anyway, Quatermass in the Pit that I mentioned in there is a fiendishly clever alien invasion story. It's part of a series of films that were done, and I even think they did one or two Quatermass stories on television after that in the 1970s. Um, and it's a delight, and it's now finally came out on Blu-ray, so you could finally get a proper restored edition print, and the audio commentary that used to be on the old Laserdisc was included, and further commentaries and documentaries and stuff on it. So he says, if you had said 20 years ago we'd have computers in our hands, they would have locked you in the loony bin. Ah, yeah, well, I've always lived in the future, so it doesn't surprise me any of that. In the 1960s, I was envisaging laptop computers. I created literally for when Man from Uncle was on. I thought what a proper spy should have is a portable computer that would have like a keyboard and a screen that would flip up, and that it would communicate to satellites, and you could get your spy information over a screen, and it would be portable. You could just carry it around. I didn't have a name for it, but that's what I thought there should be. Well, by the 1980s, a friend of mine and I did a science fiction story outline that was set in the 2020s. And we figured by then the Russian Empire would have broken up and into a bunch of competing things, and the Chinese would be really a dominant economic power in Asia, and we had to work out the future politics and stuff of things. But one of the things we had for this interstellar expedition in the 2020s was that although there was a mainframe supercomputer that they carried with them, they didn't interface with it other than through a thing we called a pad, which was a thing about the size, a little bit bigger than a credit card, that you could just keep in a pocket, and it was a view screen, and you could communicate with things through this pad that you would carry around with. And so that was in the early 1980s that we were working out that kind of an idea. So I've always kind of lived in the future, and it doesn't surprise me at all. You have to remember that the modern smartphones have more memory in them than all the supercomputers on Earth when I was growing up in the 1960s. And that's going to continue to a certain extent, to where people 20 or 30 years from now, assuming we haven't ruined ourselves completely, can theoretically have a connectivity and efficiency of information and an efficiency of displaying. By the way, for future careers, one of the things that's just in its infancy now is visualization techniques. So what do geological processes look like, not only on the surface, but also underground in the mantle, plate movements, and the way rock forms and crystallization patterns that are taking place, and the amount of water and silt that's coming in? How do you model and visualize all of that? Likewise, for cells, cellular systems, evolutionary processes, the way regulatory systems are engaging, the way predator-prey dynamics are operating, all of those things, artists who have a computer skill should be interconnecting with the scientists to find ways of displaying that information in as useful a way as possible to jumpstart future minds. So, Lisa says, I remember dial-up, yes. Nick Zentner, on one of his latest geology videos, put up a post of a lecture he had given on continental supercontinents in the Pacific Northwest that he did before the pandemic back in 2019, I think. And he showed some slides and things of when he first visited Glacier National Park as before he became a geologist, and what spurred him on to become a geologist. And there was a thing at the one of the visitors thing, a club, a country store thing, and he was pointing out how the old cars looked, all the 1980s cars, great big land yachts. And he pointed out the Coca-Cola dispenser. But what immediately jumped out to me was the phone booth. And you would have to now explain to people what a phone booth is. That in the old days, they had telephones that were connected by wires. And if you didn't own your own phone at home and wanted to call somebody, you had to go to a public telephone that was in a little box. And unless they've watched Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, they wouldn't necessarily have any idea what the hell a telephone box was, a phone booth was. Although you might get it from Doctor Who, they might think, oh, you mean a transparent TARDIS? Oh, okay, maybe something like that. Yeah, and we're anticipating more and more on that. But remember, they're only tools, so they can be fantastically useful tools. Every computer that you have in your internet capacity, you can find information at the drop of a hat. I'm like a kid in a candy store. I can download technical papers and exchange them with our network of people on a scale that's unheard of 15, 20 years ago. But it's also allowing idiots to purvey stupid things at exactly the same speed. And when you try to put information in front of them, they just go, well, fake news. And there you go. So there's the yin and the yang of what we have going on stuff. Let's see. It's like, Lisa, don't say that like it's so old. You make me feel old. Don't worry. Every single person, no matter how young, eventually is going to be pathetically old and obsolete if they aren't already dead. And there's going to be a time, no matter what, no matter how hip you think you are, when eventually everything that you hold as the hip current thing is antiquated old shit that people go, what? It's inevitable. So if you're a bit like me, where I'm simultaneously having a mind in the past with history and a mind in the far future with the technology that's radically more sophisticated than anything we have now, and in the current world, making use of everything that we can do, it makes it a little bit easier to go on. So if you are never of any time, it's easier to be timeless and to be connecting up with other things. Oh, David says, I've got idiots saying stupid things right next to me anyways. Well, that's true. And so the only principle that I operate under is if somebody says stupid shit, you tell them that it's stupid shit. Now, how you word telling them that it's stupid shit, how much information you go into, how polite you are in doing it is a matter of temperament. I'm not nearly as sweet as Erica. Erica is just as gentle and as wonderful as can be, and it's hard for her to rub somebody the wrong way. Whereas I'm an old fart, I'm a wrinkly old creature. I'm annoying. I have a high pitched voice and all that kind of stuff. Of course, they're going to be annoyed with me. I'm an arrogant bastard, so I just live with it. That's the way it is. So find your niche and work it all the way through. But I'm a cockeyed optimist. And thank you. I'll put that on there. We'll show that one. Yes, you know how to make people feel hopeful. Well, remember, we have been through crap and shit as a species before. That's the historian in me. I mean, as puzzling, worrisome as 2020 is, think of 1940, a world where World War II had just begun, where it was going to kill off tens of millions of people, including 6 million Jews, in the space of the next 5 years. And threw whole civilizations off kilter and upset vast amounts of things, set in motion massive movements of revolutions and the breaking up of colonial empires and all of that. And so the next decades are going to be complicated as the United States and the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China are dangling back and forth, and they're not sure whether we're going to blow ourselves up, and people are building bomb shelters. I mean, yipes. The 20th century, had the Great Pandemic and World War I and World War II on top of it. Totally transformed society, blew everything to smithereens and all of that. There was yipes. So let's not get too pushy out of shape. in worrying about the fact that, well, good gravy, I mean, we got to go on Zoom every once in a while because we can't go out because the COVID epidemic, which we can easily resolve just by doing this and this and this and this, um, get a grip. We have capacities to handle things. Or think of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Don't panic. Let's put that in there. Don't panic. There's philosophy in there. Let me see. Where am I? Oh, come on. Don't panic. With exclamation mark. That is the motto of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Um, and if we go back even farther into time, in periods of dark ages, times when the Roman Empire was falling apart, the 14th century when the Black Death hit, you can have localized things where everything just falls apart and can fall apart far more disastrously. I even think back into where my mom barely made it through the pandemic of 1918 when she was a kid, and how she remembered that is so scary. Um, Nobody had Zoom to work about with that. They weren't watching the evening news in widescreen, high definition television. They didn't have access to the internet where they could communicate and download articles from the CDC and the Journal of Medicine at the drop of a mouse click. I mean, get a grip that we have capacities to do things because we have the abilities to do amazing things. And so the thing is that we need to get the political will. We need to, first of all, raise the standards of politicians. I keep on telling people, don't elect Tortukans. Now, we know that there are lots and lots of Tortukans who get into political office in the Senate, in the House, in governors, in city councils, in school boards, as president of the United States, as leaders of other countries. Yeah, but it's not a good thing. And ideally, you want to have a threshold where methods questions are being asked more often, where you cut down on the incidence of tortucanosity in positions of power, and that will help. So there we go. David H., I'm never happy with any of the election results. I've yet to see a candidate that was worth voting for. Well, no, remember, nobody's perfect. But boy, the choice between Biden and Trump was a no-brainer. Between somebody who is decent in trying to do things and is not a sociopathic bully, and versus Trump, who is literally a pathological liar, a crook, a conniving, nasty narcissist. I mean, he has no redeeming characteristics whatsoever. This was a no-brainer. And so what I vote policies, and I recognize that you can't always get what you want, but you have to measure as to where you want to go in the right direction. Another one that is a useful film to watch that's oddly enough relevant to this is Lincoln, Steven Spielberg's Lincoln. Because there you are, arguably our most brilliant president, who has to get something incredible done, which was abolish slavery, and persuade a bunch of people who didn't want to do that, to do that. And to even persuade people who wanted to go way more and faster, Thaddeus Stevens and others. And there was a wonderful line in there where Lincoln says, we both know where we need to go, but there's a swamp in between. And if you just simply put your compass on the destination, you're going to bog down in that swamp and you're never going to get there. Whereas we have to figure out how to maneuver through the swamp to get to that destination. So knowing just the compass heading isn't going to help you. You have to figure out how to get what you want from the people you have available and the votes you need to get under the circumstances. And there's probably few people who were more adroit at maneuvering around an issue in a way that they didn't realize, in part because Lincoln was so brilliant that he didn't let you know how brilliant he was. If you watch that film and look at the Secretary of State Seward, the fellow who eventually is going to buy Alaska in the next administration. Anyway, he was a fabulously bright guy who, this is backstory that you won't get from watching the Lincoln movie. Seward really thought he should have been president in 1860 and was a little bit pissed off that he wasn't. And Lincoln made him Secretary of State. And for quite a few years in there, Seward still kind of thought of himself as the brilliant guy helping Lincoln. And then finally, um, you get to the stage where Seward realizes one day that Lincoln is the smartest kid in the room. He just doesn't let you know it. And that Seward has been, and that's why Seward was so incredibly loyal to Lincoln for so long in that circumstance. And Lincoln's an amazing character in that area. Um, not Jinju, not bad for a mostly self-taught man. Yes, he is a perfect example of a self-taught, brilliant man who read on his own. He had a phenomenal memory. Lincoln could recite huge swaths of Shakespeare from memory. He just was like a sponge. And is the only president I know of that has a patent. He patented a little mechanical device back in the 1840s. He was definitely a science groupie. He had a whole bunch of Darwin's books and other science material up on his to-read shelf that he never got around to because of that unfortunate 1865 incident at the movie theater, Ford's Theater, that upset that. And so it's one of the untold things of what Lincoln would have done in the second term, and then after he retired in 1869, where he would have gone on vacations and what works he would have read and what issues that he would have done had he lived for another 20 or 30 years. Who knows? It's untold history, and thanks to nincompoop John Wilkes Booth shooting him, we're not going to figure that one out. Don't meddle with the time stream. That's one of the things that you should always learn on things. Be very careful about that. But the essence behind science fiction and mystery stories and politics that I merged together in the, whoops, there we go, Paralogs of Phileas Fogg series is that applied ethics and morality and philosophy, that you stand up for the truth, you admire intellect regardless of its race, color, creed, natural origins. You disparage and dislike stupid regardless of its race, color, creed, or origins. You want to gather together and deal with people who are clever. And it's an elitism in a way, but it's not snobbish because it's not saying, well, of course, only you who look a certain way could be clever. No, 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 no. It doesn't matter what circumstance you're going. Oh, David, as going on all presidents in history, he's one of the few I would vote for. Lincoln. Well, Lincoln um, certainly wasn't unbelievably popular. He had a lot of people who didn't like him and thought he was stupid as all get out, and yet he won 2 elections. Um, but it's by all accounts had just a riveting effect on people he met. And his wit and intellect, curiosity, and gravitas is just an astonishing character. He had all this effect around him from people who interacted with him, and that's what genuine leadership has. You find it in a certain way as well with both of the Roosevelts, Teddy and FDR. That it's easy to be a leader with people who already agree with you. You can be a partisan leader. It's much tougher to be a leader who can persuade people who you disagree with to go along with you. And even people, it's not unique to Democrats and Republicans of the past area. I have a lot of disagreements with a lot of things Ronald Reagan did, but he did have a capacity for bridge building in many ways that is way above what poor presidents are. And so simply being incredibly smart is not necessarily helpful in that area. Somebody who was a brilliant person, but let you know it, was Thomas Dewey, who almost became president a couple times. He ran against both FDR and Truman. Was quite a good reform governor of New York and wouldn't necessarily have been a bad president. But he did have that quality that he was a smart kid and let you know it. And I'm not sure that kind of a personality makes for a particularly great leader. You need to be a smart kid, but you have to find a way to do it in such a way that you don't appear to be so, because you can rub people the wrong way on that. You definitely like to look into that time stream with Lincoln still alive. Yeah, one of the things that we can do now with modern special effects is digital reconstructions of things. So you can have performances where the person doesn't necessarily have to look like the person, but they can be digitally transformed into them. And that's going to become more and more common as we move into the 21st century, kind of get used to it. One of these days, there may even have to be a change in category for a hybrid performance in a film, because yes, what you're seeing looks like a human being, but it's only partly the actor that's doing that. It's also the digital team that have contributed to the appearance of it, and it's really more than just the performance of any one of them. And they might have to have a special category for that, and give up their categories. Just there used to be for a time categories for movies that were silent movies and movies in sound, until everything became that way, and they dispensed with that. Sometimes they've had differences between films that were in black and white versus films that were in color, but now virtually everything is in color. Um, I think Booth acted, well, no, John Wilkes Booth was definitely part of a conspiracy. They were not only trying to kill off Lincoln, they were trying to kill off the vice president, the secretary of state. They had people running all over the place trying to bump people off that night. And no, it was a definite conspiracy. Most of the presidential assassinations, however, have been lone wolves. That was true for Oswald, and Solgaz, who killed off McKinley, and I've forgotten Bateau that killed Garfield, and you have occasional conspiracies. There was a conspiracy to assassinate Truman that was done by some Philippine terrorists, and that was a bit of a conspiracy. There was a conspiracy of right-wing nutball military people to assassinate FDR before he could take office in 1933. And so that these things do pop up. But by and large, most of the presidential assassinations have been lone nutballs, often for the most absurd of reasons. I mean, the guy that shot at Reagan was because he wanted to impress Jodie Foster, the actress. Poor fellow, probably. I think he's still alive. He's in prison in the insane asylum thing. But as it finally dawned on him that Jodie doesn't swing that way, and therefore this was a waste of time, I don't know whether it's finally dawned on that. So, Mark Hamill's appearance in The Mandalorian. I don't get the Netflix, so the Disney Channel, so I don't get to see the thing. A Theodore Roosevelt assassination attempt. Yeah, that was an amazing one in 1912. Show you how much stamina, and Teddy was not a spring chicken in 1912 when he was running on the Bull Moose ticket. But anyway, yes, I'm trying to remember the assassin, whether it was just an anarchist or whoever. But anyway, he took a pot shot at him, I think in Milwaukee or somewhere, and Roosevelt was shot, but went ahead and delivered like a 2-hour speech before he would actually go to the hospital. And he lived quite a few years after. I mean, he lived, I think, down to 1919, 1920. He was, if anything, more than any assassination attempt, the loss of one of his kids during World War I in battle probably hit him much more than any assassination attempt was. Teddy Roosevelt was initially an extremely wimpy little kid, asthma problems and all that, and his dad helped him recuperate. He was a bit of a narcissist, not as narcissistic as Trump, and again, that's not easily possible. But still, he was a very self-possessed person. But he also was extremely talented. He was a good writer, articulate and witty. He was his career is fascinating because it was a whole series of assistants this and assistants that. I think about the only times he ever was actually the actual head of something officially was when he was governor of New York, and then also when he became president of the United States and ran in 1904 on his own right, because he was originally vice president and McKinley was assassinated. So I'm sorry for a little bit more of that history crap, but it's all fascinating stuff. And I think I will remind everybody, we are who we remember ourselves to be, and that's true as an individual, but it's also true as a species, as a culture. that if you don't know what really happened, then you get into trouble because sometimes you can go through epiphanies when you suddenly bump into some of the truth, and then you can go off the ideological deep end because you're now getting another slice that's itself very narrow. We're getting into the same problem with coming to grips with our racial history, and you've got the woke Black Lives Matter side of things that are correctly reminding us of terrible things that have happened in history, but they can also um, oversimplify. The 1619 Project has been widely criticized by a lot of historians, and Gary Coyne keeps thumping on it on why evolution is true because it oversimplifies the issue. And what good history involves is to be fair to all the facts and to not leave out any of the little niddly bits. So I think there's been a positive movement from 1619 because it reminded us of a lot of these little sore spots that got overlooked in the Glee Club version of history that you get in the public textbooks. And as a historian, the first duty is to let the chips fall where they may. And you don't try to second guess or overjudge things. You first try to find out what the facts are. And then you can get a perspective on things and make judgments where you don't have to decide that everybody, certain person is a wicked person or a perfectly fine person. More odds are they're going to be a mixture, and you find things where people make decisions that they shouldn't have. There are policies that you go. FDR, who was a great wartime leader president who has so much admiration about him, but you had the internment of the Japanese during his administration. That was started, by the way, by Governor of California at the time, Earl Warren, who later on became Supreme Court Justice and was known as the hyperliberal. Things change. It's a complicated picture. Things don't always turn out the way you might expect from the beginning. So history is a wonderful thing that be very wary of ideological components of things. You find this on the right wing with somebody like David Barton, who writes pseudo history, and it's all Glee Clubby from a conservative point of view. You have a similar problem over on the left with the late Howard Zinn, who was a very dandy writer and brought up a lot of useful issues, but comes from a very leftist perspective, and so they're slicing and dicing from that point of view. It's not that you don't pay any attention to either, but that you don't rely on them for your whole thing, and that's arguably the primary rule. Never rely on any one source for anything. Don't rely on me for everything. You might say, don't rely on me for anything. You should use me at most as a springboard to go, that's interesting, I should look into that. And then start looking into that and look and read a variety of points of view and find out, like if you find a book, check to see what the reviews were. Did it cause a firestorm? In my own time, there's a section in my tip project on Bertrand Russell, but if I ever get around to revising that section in a further book, I'm going to have to change what I wrote because I was relying on a single book biography of Russell, and it was a flawed one. And I misunderstood the nature of Bertrand Russell because I was relying on a single book. I thought, because it was a university press book, was a reliable one, but this guy had an axe to grind against Russell. And although he had done okay work in the first book, second book of the series went overboard, and I didn't know that at the time. And I would be correcting that information on there. So everybody can make mistakes, and history is even more contentious than science because unlike the rocks that are just doing their thing and human beings can be misrepresenting the data, um, history is dealing now with people's reporting of things and monuments and their memoirs, and now you have that extra added layer of the ability of people to bullshit and try to spin around information and all that. Caesar was doing it with his memoirs back in the first century BC. It's still happening with human beings today. So Lisa says, yes, usually check the authors, find out their background, find out whether they've done stuff before or after. Sometimes you discover that somebody that sounds perfectly reasonable has weird baggage. This sounds perfectly fine. And they also think the earth is flat. Okay, raises some methodological bells. When you read their books, do the thing I'm doing with the Jensen book. How well documented is it? If it's an older work, check to find out what's been done since then. It's not that a 1970s work can't be very important, but hasn't there been new work in the years since then? And then when we're dealing with a lot of subjects, just as science issues, you really can't rely completely on secondary book accounts, that you got to pay attention more to the cutting edge technical literature. So too, a lot of the cutting edge historiography hasn't made it into books yet. And it's maybe years before it makes it into the books. David said many evil people in history did in fact do some good things and vice versa, good done bad things. Oh yeah, that's where things get murky. And then the other problem is trying to figure out to get past the spin. An interesting historical issue, for example, is regarding the Julio-Claudian emperors, from Julius Caesar all the way down through to Nero. How much of what we think we know about them is due to the scandal sheet stuff from Suetonius and others? There's only a couple sources written a ways after the fact who were writing as political commentators in the new administration, the Antonine period that comes after that. And so you have to wonder, without corroboration, maybe it's not all quite true. And so there's still ups and downs about trying to figure out who Caligula was and Nero, and even whether or not Tiberius and Nero died the way they are supposed to have, or Augustus and others. It's tricky. Elise is doing a series on Jim Jones. Yes, there's one where we know the creepy results. So I think most of the interesting historiography relating to somebody like Jim Jones is the psychology both of Jones and what a cult does, and also the psychology of the people who end up in the cult. And to that point, that actually is far more important than just the nutball who's at the top. It's what's the psychology that leads people not to notice that something is going seriously wrong and don't drink the Kool-Aid. By that time, you're too late. So all of these ultimately are back to the issues of how do you construct sources? How do you test things against reality? How are you at changing your mind? How committed are you to things no matter what? It's sound method. And I display that in the nonfiction material, and also in the fiction material, in a way that's entertaining and philosophical at the same time, as to how people should behave and what people should do to be decent people and what to do to avoid being stupid. And that isn't being stupid not a good thing? We should not do that. Yeah. So anyway, we did a whole show, I think. David says, even if all true facts at the other side could not simply be buried, ignored to spin the desired narrative. Yeah. And that's where historians who are information distorters, just like scientists who might be information distorters, it never turns out well. And you have to let the chips fall where they may, because you have to understand what happened in order to make reasonable decisions to avoid making the same mistakes as other cultures did. And there's nothing more appalling than that historical amnesia. And it always offends me, beyond just the political aspect. As a person, as a historian, I dislike the anonymity of so much of the past. That when you see a building, you don't know who built it. Human beings did it. We don't know their names. We don't know their backgrounds. We don't know whether their lives were good or bad or not, unless we have some historical record of it. And the anonymity of all of that bothers me. To know that people went through their lives. Neil deGrasse Tyson has brought some of that up in the Cosmos series, of where there's all of these civilizations that existed in the past, where we only have fragments of them and we don't have individuals from them. And they lived their lives, sometimes went for centuries, millennia, and then poof, they're gone like fog. And we only have just scattering of indication that they lived at all. And the historian me goes, no. Just as I don't want to be forgotten, to become oblivious as not even a footnote, I don't want that for anybody. So there we go. and archaeology. So we have veered all over the map from science fiction movies and special effects technology and the role of art in history and philosophy in life and etc. And shameless plug for my books and just about plus all the links that I'll be putting into the show once the restream thing fits. So anybody got any last minute questions going on in there? Um, oh, biblical archaeologist. Well, let me give a fig leaf that there are an awful lot of archaeologists that are very much religious, but they can still do very fine work. And the ones that, and there can be people who don't have any religion at all, and they can be terrible archaeologists. There's a guy that thinks that chronology is all shuffled around and rearranges stuff. People get their little axes to grind. But the main things are trying to do justice to the facts, to do justice to your sources, never misrepresent a source, never quote somebody out of context in order to make it appear they have an argument that they do not do. Because the moment you do that, you're worthless, no matter how carefully you air quotes footnote. And whenever you're dealing with, say, the Middle East, in that period, you're going to be bumping into a range of archaeologists, some of whom are just scampering around trying to find evidence for the Battle of Jericho or Sodom and Gomorrah or the Exodus. That's a cottage industry, all of that. And David said, yeah, additionally, there could also be just forms of art like the Spider-Man comic analogy. If an archaeologist 500 plus years from now finds a comic book, would they know it's fiction? Yeah, indeed. And it's I'll put in another little one that's never been made into a film. I think somebody bought rights to it, but I think there's done a radio version. But it would really be a kind of David Lean scale, wondrous film, but a Canticle for Leibowitz, which I think was like 1962. I've mentioned it, I think, before. It's a poignant storyline about a whole religion segment of Catholicism that comes up, a little monastery that's in a post-nuclear war world that has misunderstood a shopping list from Leibowitz, St. Leibowitz, and they don't realize the context of it. And then eventually scholars in their future kind of figure out what was going on, and they kind of have to do soul searching as to realize, that this was just a shopping list. This wasn't really what they thought it was. And that is the ultimate duty of the sound historian or scientist or political leader or anything else, is to have the facts straight and to figure out what the policy is and to be open-minded about it and clear about it, not surreptitious, not sneaky, and try to persuade on the basis of the facts and don't distort anything. And then as a collective society, we kind of work through all the things. That's part of the stuff we do. And it's one of the things we do as citizens, both of individual cities and states and the planet. And everybody needs to deal with that. Fortunately, most people aren't complete pricks. But if too many Tortugans get in political power, the worst comes out in us. And that's the thing that you can learn from history, to see, don't do that. And the times when we do that, like the Second World War and others, no, we don't want to do that again. And certain people there, we shouldn't do that. So that's why that methods issue is not an abstraction at all. It's a serious thing that applies in all circumstances, in all places, in all universes, period. And people violate that and start using bad methods, even if they have good goals. Yeah, but in the long run, it's not going to turn out well. And we've got a bit of a track record to find that out. Don't try to meddle. Don't try to second guess. Don't try to super predict things, because you can't. Future is stochastic. It's unpredictable. Nobody who in heck could have gone back in a time machine to 1899 and strolled around Germany. Could anybody have spotted in one particular baby, little Adolf, that person was going to be a problem 30, 40, 50 years later? No. It would not have been possible to do that. So don't even think to do that. It's just off limits. That's where knowing about science fiction stories and that comes in, and what if theories in history. So I think that pretty well covers on. We're always 18 past the hour. I put adverts up for the books and stuff. I thank all the patrons. Everybody stay safe where you are. We'll see you next week. That will be December 30th. And we're almost to New Year's Eve then, and we can finally kiss 2020 goodbye in its little derriere, and then see what's going to happen in 2021. So everybody stay safe, everybody. We are shutting down, and see you later.